Fascism, and I would say to a certain extent also National Socialism, are ideologies that feed on pessimism. They're ideologies that come to power when people are despairing, when people think the future is bleak, when they are frustrated, when they are pessimistic.
Today's guest on the Guten Tag podcast is Dr. Ralf Schöllhammer, an Austrian political scientist, journalist, and lecturer known for his sharp analysis of international relations, institutional decline, and the cultural forces reshaping Western societies. In this episode, we explore Germany's shift to the right, migration, and the likelihood of the AfD rising to power in the future.
Particularly for us German speakers, due to our history, it is an uncomfortable topic. It's an important one, it's an uncomfortable topic. But there is if we look, for example, at crime statistics, right, different groups of migrants are represented in different dimensions in crime statistics. And one could, of course, say, well, this has certain reasons, cultural reasons, socioeconomic reasons. All of that is true, but it's still happening.
But the problem is that sometimes in the narrative, it feels like all migrants are the same.
As a growing share of the electorate is casting their vote for right-wing parties. Populists, far-right, extreme right, are they far-right? I'm happy to agree with that. But what you're getting at, and I'm fine if you do, are they a Nazi party? And that I think they're not, right?
Do you think the European Union is strong enough to last?
I gave you my most pessimistic outlook.
The following is a conversation with Dr. Schellhammer, and it is worth noticing that he leans politically to the right. And while we might not agree on many points, I believe it is essential to engage in conversations across the spectrum. Understanding different perspectives help us to navigate complex issues with greater clarity and depth. My name is Eduardo. This is the Guten Tag podcast. If you haven't subscribed, please consider clicking that button. Now, without any further ado, let's start with a conversation. Los geht's. Dr. Schöllhammer, or Ralf, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
I would like to know, to start, your thoughts on the concept of the Brandmauer in German politics and explain a little bit what happened in the previous days after the declarations from Friedrich Merz following the attack from Aschaffenburg in Bavaria.
You mean so the famous or infamous but now firewall that has been erected between the Alternative for Germany, the AfD, and the other political parties. Yeah, I mean, there is a shift, and that shift, I would argue, has been going on slowly but steadily since the mid-90s, both in Austria and Germany, but we also see it in the United Kingdom, we also see it in France. There is a shift to the right, and we can then discuss whether this is good or bad. I know everybody has their opinion on it, but I think this is just an objective statement of fact. Like, as a growing share of the electorate is casting their vote for right-wing parties. We can call them, populists, far-right, extreme right, moderate. As I said, labels, why not? We can have that conversation, but overall that is happening. And many of the establishment parties, meaning the parties that have been around for a significant amount of time and who have occasionally been in government, I think they still, in Germany particularly, have not really found a way how to deal with it. So the strategy the German establishment parties, until very recently, have opted for is the so-called Firewall, the Brandmauer, saying that whatever happens, no matter how many votes the AfD is going to get, we will never cooperate with them, right? We will not enter in a coalition with them. We will not vote together with them on proposals, on laws, on bills. We will try to isolate them. But I think what we've seen over the last couple of months and years is that usually that kind of isolation does not reduce the popularity of such parties. It has almost something like I'm sure that your viewers and listeners are familiar with the so-called Streisand effect, right? This phenomenon when Barbara Streisand was suing a photographer who took a picture of her villa in Malibu or wherever it was, because she didn't want people to see it. And then, of course, to the court case that she initiated, everybody saw the picture because everybody wanted to know what the court case was about. And I think the similar thing you see happening with these right-wing parties. If everybody says, don't vote for these parties are very dangerous, don't go near those parties, more and more people will say, oh, that sounds interesting, I have to take a closer look. What's going on with those parties? And another factor, something maybe we can also talk in greater detail as the podcast progresses, is that particularly younger voters, which is a completely natural phenomenon, right? The younger generation wants to be part of the counterculture. They want to go against the mainstream. They want to do not what their parents are saying. They want to do the opposite. So and we have the numbers for this, right? That very significantly, the vote share of younger voters is growing for these right-wing parties. I mean, that it's a cultural phenomenon, but I think it's also a phenomenon of the daily lived experiences of many of those young Germans or young Austrians who are slowly but surely getting more attracted to the neo-nationalist or neo-patriotic proposals that these parties are making. As I said, whether this is good or bad is a separate conversation that I'm happy to have. But I think this is just what's currently going on. And as you mentioned, it is undeniable that since 2015, although I would argue it started a little bit sooner, I would say it goes back to the early 2000s already, the Central European and Western European countries in particularly have not been very good in handling the phenomenon of mass migration. Again, we can have a separate conversation about why this is the case, but I think it's a statement of fact that whether it's welfare systems, whether it's the health system, whether it's the school system, right? If you read regional news or even national news, it's a constant barrage of things that are going wrong, and they are going wrong. I mean, as I said before, I want to be very careful. I have my political opinions, but let's establish first a little bit what we are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And very often the argument is that these parties like the AfD or the Freedom Party in Austria, they're capitalizing on these problems. That is correct, but on the other hand, they did not create those problems. So this is a little bit the idea that, oh my God, if only, it's the same with Trump in the United States, if only the Trumps, the AfDs, the FPÖs of the world would not talk about these problems, then we wouldn't have them. That's not how this works, right? The reason why these parties are ascending in voter popularity is because many of the things they're talking about are reflected in the lived experience of many people. Like, I give you a quick example from Vienna, but I know it's similarly in many German cities as well. If you send your kid to school, and that's an official number from the public school district in Vienna, and 90% of school children speak Arabic as their first language and barely speak German, that is going to be a problem because your child is not going to get an education. That has nothing to do, again, this is not a racist argument at all. It's just a statement of fact. If you go to school and teachers cannot teach math and science and whatever they are supposed to teach, because they have to make sure that people who don't speak the language of the school, the public language, the official language of the country, that they have to keep up. They have to slow down the actual transmission of knowledge and focus on doing the work of the integrative work, so to speak. And this is something that worries parents. And this is the same experience you have in German cities. And the consequence of this is that they say, okay, which parties are pointing out these problems, which parties are talking about these issues. And if it's only the AfD, if it's only the FPÖ, if it's only the Front National or the Rassemblement National, as they are now called, if it's only Reform UK, well, then at some point they will start to vote for these parties. I don't think it's a great mystery.
This happened in big cities. The fact that the majority of the children in schools are speaking Arabic or any other foreign language happens mostly in big cities. Because, for example, what I see here in smaller towns in Germany, they're very German. In Berlin, yes, for example, in the neighborhood where I live, we have a school, which would be our district school, that has that problem. So every parent that wants to care about the education of their children are already 1 or 2 years in advance sending their applications to a school in a different neighborhood where they don't have the problem, because they say there's a lot of problematic kids in that school and that most of them don't speak German. So it happens exactly what you say. They need to reduce the speed of the education because they need to go at the speed of the other ones who need to catch up first. Is it that, like, in percentage statistically relevant, or is it more like anecdotal?
Well, we just use statistics, right? As I said, if you have a school and the official statistic is 90% don't speak German, we just got the numbers for Vienna as a whole. So in Vienna at the moment, it's about 44% of all school starters don't speak German as a first language. That's a significant number, right? You could say, well, it's less than 50%, but 44% that's a remarkable number, meaning that half of the upcoming generation is at the moment not capable of speaking the main language of the country. I mean, by the way, to be clear, that is not just a problem for Austrian school children. It's also a problem for the kids of immigrants, because it's very hard to integrate and be economically successful in Austria or Germany if you don't speak the language. So that, I would say, is not anecdotal. And the second point, you're correct that this is mainly a phenomenon of the large cities. But you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation Aschaffenburg. Aschaffenburg is a town of 70,000 people. That in Austria, we would call that a larger town, but in, let's say, in the global perspective, this is not what you would call, an urban metropolis. And if you have the situation, if you look at what unfolded there, even before the tragic and horrific events that took place in January of this year, what happened was that even before that, the police gave official warning and saying, the park is dangerous, don't be there at night, and be very careful because there's drug dealing going on and all these kind of things. And this is something that makes people uncomfortable. The idea, and you did not say this, but I think this is very often the argument that is made in the political discourse, that the problems that right-wing parties point at do not really exist, and they're kind of made up by the AfD, by the FPÖ. I think it's a strategy, right? You can say, you can tell people and say, no, everything these parties tell you, it doesn't really happen. But of course, people are not stupid. People are fairly rational, and they look around and say, okay, did my surroundings, did my conditions, my living conditions change over the last 20, 25 years? And the answer you're going to get in many, not in all cases, in many cases is going to be yes. And the second argument I think you're alluding to is, well, okay, but that's just happening in the cities, so why are people concerned in the countryside? But that's a little bit like saying that a non-smoker is not allowed to be concerned about the dangers of smoking because he himself or she herself is not a smoker. Like, you don't have to experience something in order to be against it. This is, I'm opposed to war, but I don't have to experience war in order to be against it. So if people in the countryside see what's happening in the cities, it is, I think, a rational act to say we don't want these issues, these problems to spill over into our neighborhoods. So this, I think, is something to keep in mind, that very often we can try to say that these voters are irrational or they don't know what they're voting for. I think they have a better sense of what they're voting for than they get credit for.
The narrative's normally that these problems are a creation of their imagination, of the far right. I think what happens when we had a case like what happened in Aschaffenburg or in Solingen or in Mannheim, it puts in evidence that something is going on and people feel like maybe they're being lied to.
That's true. And we must not forget, and this sometimes kind of slips under the table in these conversations, only the worst and the most horrific cases make national news. If you look at regional news in Germany, stabbings, by the way, the same is true in the United Kingdom, right? Stabbings, knife attacks have significantly increased. Die Welt recently had a quite significant article about this, where they said more or less, if you take in just knife attacks, you have between 1 or 2 stabbings in Germany every day. And this is just something, I don't want to be nostalgic for the past, but we have to be honest in this, as we are in this conversation, that this is something that did not happen in the past. We know that not just in Germany, by the way, we have similar phenomenon in Sweden, where over the last couple of weeks, you have every week an attack with a hand grenade. I mean, this is becoming, you're correct what you said originally, this was anecdotal a couple of years ago, but now it's an almost weekly occurrence. And again, for understandable reason, people don't like this. If you live in Sweden, if you would have told anybody 30 years ago, you will have, quite violent gang wars between rival clans in the city of Malmö, people would have said, you're nuts, you're insane. This is Sweden, right? Homogeneous, tall, blonde, white Sweden. There will be no gang wars or drug clans or, or quasi-Nordic cartel wars going on. But
it's the country where you unlock the doors.
Yeah, but you're correct. But that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. It probably was never as romantic as the nostalgia would like to have it. But that is how the memory, if you want, is exactly as you said. You don't lock the doors. You know your neighbors. Everybody speaks your language, right? People are named. I know this sounds ridiculous, but it matters to people, and we can ridicule it or not. But everybody, you felt that the environment, the cultural, social environment in which you were living. And there's a growing number of people that feel that slipping away. Maybe I think it is justified. Critics of me would say it's not justified. But apparently it appears justified enough that people change their voting behavior. But if you take a look at Germany at the moment, and you look at a party like the Social Democratic Party, there was a time when the Social Democratic Party got 38% of the vote. Currently, they are at 15%. If 23% of your voters, if you lose 23 percentage points of your voters, something is going on. And this happened in a very short amount of time. And even the CDU-CSU, right, they're currently in polls between 29 and 30%. That's on the low end what they usually had since World War II. So if the traditional parties are being left by voters in droves and they switch then either to the Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht or the AfD, something is going on. And I think the attitude, by the way, we saw the same in the United States with Donald Trump, the attitude to say, oh, those voters are just idiots and we know better. Again, you can say this, but this is not how you win a voter back. Like if somebody votes for the AfD and the reaction is, oh, you must be an idiot. Yeah, good luck to get that voter back to whoever party you want them to vote for.
You mentioned that there's these things that are happening in Europe, and there are some parties which are tackling these concerns for the citizens. Why the other parties are not doing that only pushes people to vote for those parties. However, every time that they try to, for example, to implement some common sense migration policy, they get criticized when, for example, parties like the SPD mention something about remigrating people or like deporting the people who don't have the permission to stay in the country. They get over criticism and they say that they are moving to the right. Is that something that, and a lot of people say that actually that doesn't work for these kind of parties, that actually just pushes people to the right, because why they should vote for the party that is now newly offering that in their agenda when they have already an alternative that can offer that? Is that true that for parties like center left to implement policies against migration or common sense migration policies just hurt them more than actually helps them?
Well, I think you make a fantastic point, and that's a great one to unpack, because the argument now is, okay, in order to keep parties like the AfD small, the parties of the center have to get serious about migration. Okay. Now, as you just eloquently and I think correctly described, if the center parties try to do something about migration, they're immediately labeled as being now far right. So this is the thing. So the argument very often is the parties of the center have to do something about migration, and when they try to do it, they're immediately labeled as being far right. So naturally, people then at some point will say, you know what, I'm going to vote. Then why not vote for the far right parties anyways? And the other issue is, which again I believe is a little bit misrepresented also in the media. If we look at the actual position of these quote unquote far right parties, they are first of all not against, maybe some of the members are, but usually they're not against all kinds of migration. So for example, I don't want to get too personal, but Luis, I assume that you are a migrant to Germany.
Yes,
Yes.
I am.
Exactly. And I'm 100% convinced that nobody in the AfD or nobody in the FPÖ or whichever right-wing party says, Luis, that's the guy we need to remigrate. Luis has to go. No, they know precisely whom they're talking about. They talk mainly about non-Western and culturally difficult to integrate people, and of course those who have a criminal record, and they are very open about this. And I think, as you said before, that's a common sense approach, but even that's an approach that many parties on the left are not willing to go along with.
For me as a migrant, it's very important first of all to distinguish the difference between just a migrant or a criminal, because sometimes they're migrants that do crimes, and yes, those have to be deported. But the problem is that sometimes in the narrative, parties like the AfD feels like all migrants are the same. So that's, for example, for some people, the risk that you're put in the same pot as the others. And I hear a lot that, like, they say they like the ones who want to work and integrate in this country. The only thing that, can you really trust in those parties, because they have people that are like very extreme, like Björn Höcke, for example, and a lot of people who has that kind of rhetoric. Alice Weidel, looks more reasonable, but for me, in my perspective, maybe you can expand on that. Feels like they put the person who looked like more agreeable, more not so extremist. So they put someone who even is a lesbian and that has a partner with a migration background and that lives in Switzerland, and that like put out like, I would say, a token candidate.
I would say, I mean, she is the leading candidate, right? She is at the moment leading the party. So that's a pretty strong position for a potential token candidate, right? I mean, the party agreed she's running the party. Her vice chair, if you want, Timo Kruppala, made the same argument, right? He said that of course the AfD is welcoming to what you described before, right? To migrants that work hard, that want to be part of German society, that want to integrate. That has been the official position. And I also understand your worry that you described before about, kind of the visual issue. Now, the question I would ask you is then, of course, but would that situation improve if migration continues at the levels it currently does? So this is the thing. People are more and more sensitized, and you're correct. And particularly for us German speakers, due to our history, it is an uncomfortable topic. It's an important one. It's an uncomfortable topic. But there is if we look, for example, at crime statistics, right? Different groups of migrants are represented in different dimensions in crime statistics. And as you said before, right, there are people from Southeast Asia, people from Latin America are simply less present in those statistics than people from the Middle East, from North Africa, from from Afghanistan, from parts of Central Asia. Again, these are just the numbers. And one could, of course, say, well, these have certain reasons, cultural reasons, socioeconomic reasons. All of that is true, but it's still happening. So any crime has a reason, so to speak. But that does not negate that the crime happened. So, when you have, let's say, incidents like what happened in 2015, I don't know if you remember, the New Year's Eve in Cologne, right, with the kind of the mass happenings of sexual assault. And I'm sure there were reasons, right, and the upbringing, it was mostly young men at a certain age, high levels of testosterone. All of that is true. But just because we know why it happened does not change the fact that it happened. So if you then have a growing number of women of, I would say, all ethnicities and all backgrounds, increasingly feeling unsafe, you don't help them if you say, well, there were certain reasons why they did it, and let's get even more people from that specific demographic, right? I'm open to have debates and say it's not religion, it's age, it's masculinity. I'm open for all these conversations, but it is still happening. And I think it's also a problem for, well, as you described, there is a tipping point where, and I fear this as much as you do, that at some point, a growing number of people will no longer distinguish between well-integrated and not well-integrated migrants, and their ire and hatred will turn against all migrants. But the risk of that happening is higher if you continue migration at the current levels than if you try to get it under control.
If you live in Germany, you have worked less than 12 months, or if you have bought a new computer, or if you have to travel more than 30 minutes to your workplace, well, maybe it's worth filing your tax refund in Germany, because I think you might receive a very good tax return. I know that we think that it might be very complicated, or some people are even scared of the Finanzamt, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. Everything depends on the tools that you're using. For example, I use Wundertax. With Wundertax, you can complete your entire tax return online. What's more, you can calculate your potential refund, see what deductions you're eligible for, and determine whether it's worth filing before you even start. So if you go to gutentag.wundertax.de, Wundertax like Wonder Tax, but with a U, they even have the website in English, so it will be easier for you, and it will take you around 20 minutes or even less. Thanks for our sponsor, Wundertax, and now let's continue with the conversation.
Friedrich Merz passed a 5-point migration policy that was like very hardly criticized, and even you wrote an article about it that the AfD criticized it. Why not to do it now? When he said, when I'm the chancellor, I will implement this. And then Alice Weidel argued that why not implement them now, where the legal framework allows it.
He was hoping he can promise to do something without needing the support of the AfD beforehand. And I would argue that Alice Weidel called his bluff. Right? She said, listen, you have our votes. You're correct. You said before when we talked about anecdotes. I mean, it's making policy based on as horrific as they are, based on anecdotal incidents is always problematic. But on the other hand, of course, and we also had the CDU politician that also was murdered a couple of days ago. It's just there is the perception that these things we said this a couple of minutes ago, that these things happen on an kind of on a more regular basis than they should, especially in a civilized society. So when then political parties say we have to do something about it, it was completely natural for the AfD to say, all right, then let's do something about it, because either you want to actually do something about this problem or you want to maintain the firewall. It's like it's your call, basically. And I think strategically that was it was the logical move, but it was also a smart move. Now, everything that was decided in the first week and the last week of January and the first week of February still has to go through the Bundesrat, which is the basically the second chamber, and there neither the CDU, CSU, and the AfD have no majority. So I think many of these laws that on the 5 points that Merz has announced will never make it into law under the current conditions. But the question is after the elections in February. So I don't know when you will air our conversation. So the elections are on February 23rd. So maybe when people see this conversation, we know the results already, but now at the time of speaking, we don't. With whom is he gonna go into a coalition government for all the things that he's promised to do? He says he's not, and he still sticks to it. He's not going to do it with the AfD. So he's going to enter a coalition with the SPD most likely, and potentially, if the SPD is as weak as it currently seems, he probably needs the Greens as well, because there's a high chance that the FDP is not even going to make it into parliament. Mm-hmm. And it will be very hard. I mean, the Greens just recently voted at their party convention that they want to make it easier for family reunification. That's fine, right? If the Greens are a party for more migration, I think we are a democracy. Everybody has a right to their position. But you cannot split the baby, right? So Merz cannot say, "Oh, we're gonna have the harshest and strictest migration policies this country has ever seen," and then he says, "Oh, by the way, we could also enter into a coalition government with the very party that has the exact opposite position on this very issue, which seems to be very, very important for most of the German people."
I mean, there's also a lot of the people that support the AfD. They claim that the AfD is not a far right party or extreme right party.
Well, if you listen to what Alice Weidel said in her conversation with Elon Musk, who she recently also gave a pretty long interview to Bloomberg and other English-speaking outlets, she calls the party a conservative libertarian party. Now, as you said before, maybe this is just a token argument because in truth there's something else. And there is, I mean, no doubt about this, that there is a very strong hard right, far right element. You mentioned Björn Höcke, for example. So that's very hard to deny. On the other hand, if you look at their party pamphlets, if you look at their party program, if you cross out the name AfD and just look at their major points, I would say they sound more or less like conservative parties of the 1980s and the 1990s. I don't see a significant difference there. And the likelihood of them, I think, is also something that's important. Given the constellation of the German parliamentary system, they will never govern on their own. So they will always have a coalition partner, right? So you can, even if one would say they're a far-right party, even if they would be in government, there is another party and there's parliament that can soften that if you want. Mm-hmm. The question is, and this is something the German voters have to decide, what do they believe are the fundamental challenges the German nation or the state of Germany is facing in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and which party has the most appropriate and required answers? And again, I'm not going to lie to your audience. I'm not going to lie to you, Luis, because that would be dishonest. I think that the AfD is a viable option. I tend to agree with Elon Musk's statement that they are the last hope for Germany. I would like to see them in government. It's not going to happen, but I would like to see them in government either after this election and then, which is more likely, after the next election in 4 years, because on many points, whether it's energy policy, whether it's migration policy, whether it's their economic policies, I'm not a fan of their Russia policy, although We would have to talk generally about the relationship between Germany and Russia. That's historically more complicated, I think, than very often is appreciated. But I do think that they have many answers. And I don't think they are they far right? I'm happy to agree with that. But what you're getting at, and I'm fine if you do, are they a Nazi party? And that I think they're not, right? Are they a fascist party? I don't think they are. You cannot be simultaneously a party that says we need to cut back the state and also be totalitarian, because the main essence of totalitarianism is you want more state, you want more government, you want more bureaucracy.
If they're a Nazi party or not, or a fascist party or not, there's a lot of problems using these terminologies, because sometimes, or I see it, that why we call people fascist or authoritarian regimes fascists, because of the fascist party of Mussolini. So it was in their name. So I would assume that, okay, who's a Nazi? Well, just a Nazi. Just a Nazi is a Nazi.
I agree.
What I would use, because then we use this kind of terms as, let's say, tokens to classify people or disqualify ideas. Same thing with socialism or communism. Oh, you're a communist. And by using that term, you associate everything with Stalin, and everything that could be a Marxist idea is like, you're a communist. Like, for example, Sarah Wagenknecht. You're a communist, but at the same time, she's a Nazi, so she's both. So,
listen, I would even agree. Are there Nazi sympathizers within the AfD? Yes, I mean, so I would not deny that. Just as I would not deny that there are communist sympathizers within the alliance, Sarah Wagenknecht. But the question is, are those sympathizers at the center of the party, or are they at the fringe? Like, is that the dominant ideology of the party? Because this is where, and you're absolutely correct in what you said, and this is where we have to be careful. Every party has a lunatic fringe. Some parties have it more, other parties have it less. But the question is that lunatic fringe dominating the party, or is it contained, if you want, by the party? And again, if the AfD turns into a full-blown Nazi party, I'm the first one to point this out. But under the current leadership of Alice Weidel, it is not, right? Whatever Alice Weidel is, she's not the second coming of Hitler. She doesn't have the, it's just, she's not a Hitler-esque figure. That can change. And as I said, that absolutely can change. And the other part is that I think you also correctly pointed out is that we are even gotten so lazy because the National Socialists never really called themselves fascists, because as you correctly pointed out, fascism was the Italian phenomenon and National Socialism was the German phenomenon. Now, were there some similarities? Yes. But would a National Socialist call himself a fascist? Well, historically, I would say no, because they considered themselves to be something, as I said, there are similarities, there are overlaps, but all in all, they considered themselves to be something different. And it is intellectually lazy to kind of take the terrifying and horrible uniqueness of these movements and just kind of label everybody whom I don't like with this. The idea, as you also said before, and I fully agree with as well, the idea of both fascism, communism, National Socialism was to create, quote unquote, a new man. And what I mean by this, right, to say that the state is a totalitarian machine that can take the individuals of a country and reform, remold them into something that they weren't before. And this is why they argued and justified the tremendous power that the government and the state was supposed to have, because they argued that this is such an incredibly difficult task that you need total control over the lives of the people. That is not part, I'm sorry, for all the horrible things within the party, that is not part of the FPÖ or AfD or Donald Trump's program. If you look just if we just jump across the Atlantic for a second, Elon Musk and Donald Trump are kind of excessively trying to cut back the US government. They try to cut back the state. They try to reduce bureaucracy. I'm sorry, you cannot be totalitarian with a shrinking bureaucracy. It's just, as you correctly said before, this is the exact opposite of what totalitarianism is. Now, we can have a conversation whether we think, Trump is good and Musk is good, or Weidel is good or Weidel is bad. And maybe they are bad, but they are not Nazis. It's intellectually lazy to just say, oh, this is a Nazi party. No, as you correctly said, a Nazi is a Nazi. Trump is Trump, Musk is Musk, and Weidel is Weidel. And we should not try to conflate all these things.
Yeah, true. Like with the whole argument of, is Elon Musk a Nazi? When for a whole week on every mainstream media or even social media, whether he's a Nazi or not? Well, the answer is easy. Was that a Nazi salute? Maybe yes. Is he a Nazi? Probably not, or like very likely not, because none of the ideas align with the Nazis. But was it a Nazi salute? Maybe, yeah. I mean, or maybe it was a Roman, or maybe now it's the Elon Musk salute. I think is how it's going to be more mainstream now in the future.
I mean, he's without switching the topic, but
yeah.
I mean, if you look at the entire video, he is the kind of things that he tries to accomplish, you have to be a little bit crazy. And as you can see, he's jumping up and down. I find him fascinating. And I think that the idea that you have an individual that says we have to colonize space, I think that's awesome, right? I mean, this is the kind of ambition I find very, very agreeable. But to think that sinisterly he sits at home and is reading Mein Kampf and the biography of Mussolini, and that his true plan is to have brown shirts marching through Washington, I'm sorry. I'm not saying that those people don't exist. I'm sure they do, both in Germany and the United States. But is it Elon Musk? I don't think so. And yes, everybody says, yeah, but the Nazis thought it was a Nazi salute. Yeah, but Nazis think lots of things. Like that a loser who is in his mother's basement, in his fake SS uniform, got excited because Elon Musk did something that looked like a Nazi salute. I get it, but that still doesn't make it a Nazi salute. So,
yeah,
as I said, I agree with you.
But that's something that that you mentioned about this excitement that you have. For example, when he says, "Let's colonize Mars," or like maybe, if we don't want to use the word colonization, let's terraform Mars for humans.
Fair enough.
And I think that's exactly what a lot of Americans feel. They feel like this excitement that they say, okay, we're going to go to space again. They have like this excitement that there's some sort of vision. They thought of a couple of days ago that they were like top of the spear in AI. Well, Chinese right now, they show them that maybe they're not. But But is Europe maybe missing that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of vision? Like now Elon Musk had brought to the Americans, okay, let's go to space, let's go to the moon, let's try new things, let's be like the America from the Cold War.
I think that's a great question, and there are two things that make this question so important. One is the very reason why a fascist America at the moment is unlikely is because of the sentiment that you described. Fascism, and I would say to a certain extent also National Socialism, are ideologies that feed on pessimism. Right? They're ideologies that come to power when people are despairing, when people think the future is bleak, when they are frustrated, when they are pessimistic. If you look at the United States at the moment, you described it perfectly. There is a newfound enthusiasm. There is optimism about the future. You don't fall for a Hitler or Mussolini if you think that tomorrow is going to be better than today. Right? Because what these movements have capitalized on were grievances, were pessimism, was the idea, that history has betrayed us and we have been stabbed in the back, and there's a conspiracy of the Jews against us. So all these negative things, like all this pessimism, that we are in chains. So this is what these ideologies have fed on and are still feeding on, I would argue, today. That's not the case in the United States. Now, looking at Europe, let me be very clear. Do I think that on the horizon there is the chance, the risk of new fascism, a new National Socialism? I would say yes, absolutely. But it's not going to be the AfD. It's not going to be the FPÖ. It's going to be what comes after them. It's because at the moment, a significant part of the electorate believes that there is an alternative within the democratic system. That's what the people who vote for the AfD don't want a dictatorship. They don't want Alice Weidel to become the Führer. Now, let's assume, hypothetically, that the AfD never gets into government and that nothing changes. At some point, people will say, if I cannot change policies within the existing system, it's not the parties, it's the system itself that is at fault. And this is exactly what happened in the 1930s, right? That that the point was not, the National Socialists did not say, hey, we are just one of many parties and we want to, we want to be in parliament and debate and make laws with you guys. They by the communists at the time as well, they openly said they want to abandon parliamentary democracy. They want to abandon democracy. So they never were shy about their goals. And the point why people, then of course you had the Great Depression. So there were all these additional factors that fed into this sense of pessimism. And they said, we are the ones we can rebuild, re-erect Germany because the world is a cruel place and everybody is against us. And I think that sentiment is growing. So let me be very clear. I think that risk does exist, but I think you increase the risk if you don't allow the moderate far right to participate in governing. At some point, let me rephrase this. If you don't allow the far right that is within the constitutional framework and is willing to operate within the constitutional framework, which AFD is, you will get the ex-constitutional, the outside of the constitutional framework political parties that openly will run on a program saying, let's abandon democracy, let's abandon the parliamentary system, just like Mussolini did in Italy, just like Hitler did in Germany. We are not there yet, but could we get to this point? Yes, absolutely. That risk is an absolutely real risk. You're absolutely correct in your assessment.
As a political scientist, do you still believe in the terms left and right? Is that an accurate description of the political landscape nowadays?
Yes,
what is your?
I think it's still helpful. It's not a perfect description. I know some people say, oh, we have to left and right is no longer valid. No. There's still we have still a fairly good sense of what it means to be right wing and what it means to be left wing. It's not appropriate in all areas, right? It's not a one size fits all approach, but I think as a general kind of as a first assessment of where party stands, or are they more open free market, or are they more for central planning? Are they culturally more conservative, or are they culturally more on the, for lack of a better term, on the progressive / woke side? I think in that respect, left and right is still a helpful category.
I want to just shortly touch the topic because I think and I believe migration is not the only problem that Germany has or Europe has, especially Germany. I want to talk about moral licensing.
Well, the concept of moral licensing basically is that if you consider yourself a very good person, a goody two shoes, as one would say, if you consider yourself to live, by all the right values and all the right virtues, that sometimes this can bleed over into saying, okay, I can sometimes break the rules because I'm such a good person. This is my favorite example is always, if you think environmental activists taking private planes. That's kind of my favorite argument, or my favorite example, because the argument is, well, we do so much for the environment, we do so much for climate, so therefore it's okay if we take a private plane. It's okay if we, the Luisa Neubauer, I think I'm sure she's a lovely girl, but I think she's a great example for this. She's flying to the US, she's flying to Davos, she's flying to London, like she's jet setting around the world, all in the name of saving the climate. And somebody would say, well, Luisa, you must have quite the carbon footprint with all your traveling. But the argument would be, yes, but I do it for the climate and therefore it's okay. That's the more licensing. Well, there was this funny case in Germany, I think, where two last generation protesters they missed their court date because they were en route to their vacation in Bali in Indonesia. That's a similar case,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
So you throw some painting on a picture. So you do your virtue signaling. You do your great thing for the environment, and then you can hop on a plane and fly to Bali to recover from all the activism that you did before.
Yeah, we're putting orange paint on the Brandenburger Tor, and the chemicals that you need to remove it, they cause more damage than the actual thing they wanted to save. You talk a lot about how culture can break a political system. Do you think the European Union is strong enough to last, or is it falling apart?
Well, if anything, this is going to be migration is going to be one of these issues, but I think also, and you alluded to it a little bit, energy policies will do the second thing. Is that political frustration can be softened in their impact if economic conditions are good. So if living standards go up, even dissatisfaction with the political system is not that big of a problem, right? If your individual conditions are improving, you are less likely to start a revolution. If, however, you are frustrated with the political system and your living standard and living conditions go down, then you have a problem. And I think this is what we see a little bit now. Frustration with politics has always been high. So the legitimacy of certain political parties has always been, for a significant amount of time now, have been decreasing. But if now people also feel that they are getting poorer, then you get, and this is what I said before also about the potential for future fascism, then you get into dangerous territory. So if the established parties, and I would actually include at this point even the AfD in this, if they are not capable one way or another to create the conditions where living standards of people, of the average person, is going up again, you do create pre-revolutionary conditions. Like the idea that that's more on the left than on the right, the idea that some on the left had, that if you just say you getting poorer will save the planet, then people will say, all right, I accept getting poorer, was always a fool's errand, for the very reason that usually most people thought it's not me who's going to get poorer, it's the guy next to me, right? So whoever has to make the sacrifice in the name of climate change, it's the other guy. But now it turns out it is actually you. Like most Germans did not consider their electricity bills until the breakout of the war in Ukraine, until the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And all of a sudden, they realized, whoa, wait a moment, electricity was always expensive, but now it got expensive to a level where it started to hurt people. And under these conditions, then, for example, turning off nuclear power plants, that, let's just, to put it mildly, was not particularly helpful. And if there is a sentiment on, not everybody, but if there is a significant part of the population that starts to think, wait a moment, is the government actually pursuing the Germans' interests, or are they pursuing the interests of, something else, be it, the fight against climate change, be it universal human rights, again, all noble things. But there is a sentiment, and I don't think that that sentiment is unjustified, that the primary responsible for the German government are the German people. And if there is, and that perception might be wrong, but if there's a growing perception that the leadership in Berlin is more concerned with, let's say, the world than they are with Germany, then more and more people will turn their backs on those leaders, on those traditional parties, and go to those parties whom they believe that they put Germany and the Germans, and including, by the way, those people who came, like yourself, for example, that came from other parts of the world to Germany, that they put them first. And that is, as I said, that is a dangerous trajectory. If people no longer think that those who govern them have their interests at heart, they will at some point revolt against them. First at the voting booth. If they feel that does not make a difference, they will look for other means. And then, as I said before, then we could enter into really dangerous territory.
Yeah, totally right. I mean, I always say that because the narrative is always, let's save the planet, but I would like to hear more like, let's save civilization. And by saving civilization, you are putting people also on in that plan. Because when you say the world is always going to live with humans or without humans, what we want to save is humans. We want to care about humans, and maybe to find the middle point where we don't destroy the world, but we put humans in the first place. Let's not put like some policies or like some measures for climate change above the needs of the human being, which are like, I want to get food, I want to pay my electricity, I want a job, I want education, and I want to have fun. And for example, that thing about flying, there has been an increasing amount of, how's it called, flight shaming. Like,
yes. Yeah.
And that's like very annoying, because it's like, but I mean, I know the world is there, but I also want to enjoy it. So I don't feel okay with this flight shaming all the time, for example.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think you're absolutely right. This idea that, which is, by the way, a very German way to look at the work, and that fun is a bad thing. That that life is, it's a very very Schopenhauerian. This is that life is tragedy. Or very Nietzschean, if you want. That life is struggle and it's tragic and it's only in suffering can great things be accomplished. To be honest, that's more Nazi-esque in ideology than what you just described. You say, listen, of course we have to make a trade-off between, not wrecking the planet, but can we at least save some of the fun? And and I could not agree more. Usually people who like fun, who want to enjoy their life, who want to go out, have a nice dinner, these are not the kind of people that fall for totalitarian ideologies. But they will, if they feel that more and more and more of these small pleasures of life are taken away from them. So all these debates about you shouldn't eat meat, you shouldn't fly, you shouldn't drive your car, you annoy people. And sometimes if people are annoyed, they can do unexpected things. As I said, at the moment, in the next 4 years, I don't see the fascists take over. 10 years, 12 years, 16 years, I wouldn't be so sure.
Doesn't sound so optimistic.
Well,
or do you have a little bit of optimism?
Well, I have optimism, because I think what's currently happening is, and we started our conversation with Friedrich Merz, is that politicians are opportunists. And once they realize that the original positions no longer resonate with the people, they will change their positions. So they will change their positions on climate change, they will change their positions on migration, they will change their positions on taxation. The question is, will it be fast enough? But they will change those positions. And at some point, people will say, look at this, actually things can change. And then they no longer have any need to turn towards truly radical individuals or radical parties.
Which is actually the work of a politician, to represent the interest of the population.
Most certainly.
Of the majority of the population.
Yes.
Specifically, yeah. Are your views sometimes challenged, or do you have problems sometimes in the academia? Normally, we see it sometimes in the United States that the academia is normally left-leaning. Do you receive a lot of criticism in the academia?
Occasionally, but I tend to be high in my spirits. I make no secret out of my positions, and whoever agrees with me agrees, whoever disagrees. And usually, the more personal the disagreement gets, the weaker the arguments of the other side are. So if you cannot argue your case without name calling or insults or the usual accusations of fascism, racism, Nazism, and all these kind of things, but I try to tune it out. So to give you one example, on social media, I don't attack people on social media. And if people attack me, I use my favorite function, which is the mute button. So I've never blocked anybody. I find muting much more entertaining, because it's, the person doesn't even know that you no longer see what they're saying. So they can yell onto Twitter, and they can yell onto all these platforms. I have no idea what's going on. And that's also good, I would say, for me, psychologically. You don't have to, and this is, I think, the mistake that both on the right and on the left many people make. You don't have to engage with everyone who attacks you. So if an anonymous account with 23 followers says, "Ralf, you're an idiot," I mean, there's for a split second, I say, "Oh my God, why is somebody thinking I'm an idiot?" But then, who cares? There are many people out there who think I'm an idiot, and there are many people out there who I think are idiots, but I don't rub it into their faces. And if they feel that the irresistible urge to rub it into my face, so be it. But I can live with it, right? I try to, once a week, I make a social media free day. Very good. I go for a walk. I take a cold shower, and usually that helps.
And besides, for someone who's in the extreme left, for a far left, anything to the center is on the right.
That is my experience as well. That I have to agree with that. I mean, let me be completely frank with you. Of course it is. I've been right of center for the better part of the last 20, 25 years. So do I get a certain pleasure out of the fact that it appears as if my side is on the brink of winning? Yeah, of course. But I will know, for 25 years I've been on the losing side, and now it changes. And 25 years from now, when the right overreaches, as you said, when we are at the position where we say that everything to the left of the far right is described as far left, the pendulum will swing to the other side. And I gave you my most pessimistic outlook, but I do have strong trust into our democratic institutions and that they hold. We are this scaremongering of our democracy is on the brink of being lost. I think it's irresponsible. Our institutions are much more resilient. Also, the European Union, it's much more resilient than we tend to believe. So, and again, particularly, I'm Austrian, you're Latin American, right? I think we have to tell our German friends and German compatriots that, cheer up a little bit. I know the German sentiment is that the end is always nigh and the world is going to end tomorrow. It's not. And if we return to reasonable policies in some of these sectors, common sense policies in economics, in migration, and in energy, I think there is the potential for a fairly bright future.
Ralf Schöllhammer, thanks for sharing your points. It's been a pleasant conversation. We have discussed very different points of views. A lot of the points of views I have discussed with you and talk with you are with a different angle than I normally do. I am very happy to hear the other side. And I hope that this conversation helps the people to figure out what is on the other side and also to find the truth at the end of the tunnel.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me, Luis.